Hi, and thank you for tuning to the Fight Zone podcast. I'm Seth, and in this episode, I talk with the fight dietitian Jordan Sullivan. Jordan is a combat athlete himself and has an undergraduate degree in exercise and nutrition science and Master of Dietetic studies. He is working with amateur and professional UFC level athletes. His The Fight Science podcast is my favorite one. He talks with various scientists involved in the combat sports who break down the problems and methods of weight cutting. It is exciting to see how athletes who now get involved in science bring it now back into the combat sports and bring the game to a completely new level of understanding and performance. Unless you are not super heavyweight who never have to worry about the weight cut, I think this podcast is a must for every combat sport athlete. You can contact Jordan on Instagram, the_fight dietitian, Facebook, the fight dietitian, email info@thefightdietitian.com, and his website www.thefightdietitian.com. I greatly enjoyed my conversation with Jordan, and we will continue working with him in the future to support the athletes for the upcoming IMMAFA QLD Open at Gold Coast on 12th and 13th of October, with a weight cut workshop organized here in Gold Coast to help the athletes safely make weight for the competition. The date is yet to be confirmed, but we're working towards the mid-September, so follow the Facebook page for the Fight Dietitian and IMFA International Mixed Martial Arts Federation of Australia Facebook page. And I hope you enjoy and learn from this episode as much as I did.
Why do we fight? To protect home and family. To preserve balance and bring harmony. For our kind, the true question is, what is worth fighting for? The Fight is All podcast.
Okay, I think we're on. Cool. So, first of all, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. I love your podcast. I'm a big fan. So I'm working with IMMAFA of Australia here, and since they started these coaching courses, they put me back to learning stuff. Back to the sports science a bit, which I was a bit away, like just doing the stuff, and then I find you and start listening to the podcast. I pretty much listened to everything that you did. It was really awesome, and all these science people. It's actually really awesome that all these people that start getting involved in the MMA sport, because back in the days, the fighting sports was a big, like, aside from the science. And everything was a lot of, like, you heard from this guy, you heard from that guy, a lot of bro science involved. Now that people like you, like, and the science you bring into the thing, so that's really awesome, especially for the specialty you're doing, the weight cut. But before we start the whole thing, could you, like, tell a bit of your combat sports story, how you get involved, and how you study this, what you're doing now, and started the podcast?
Yeah, hey Seb. Yeah, so I'll do it in a real quick one because I've gone on podcasts and given a really long story. So I pretty much grew up playing rugby as like a lot of guys from Australia. I guess MMA wasn't such a massive thing when I was younger. So I grew up playing rugby, and I used to box in my off seasons when I got a bit older. So when I was about 14, I started boxing, and then I played rugby very seriously. And then I got injured really badly when I was about 19 or so, and then gave up rugby and stuck to boxing. And then it was around the time I was starting university, so I was getting very interested in nutrition, and I was obviously training quite a lot. And then finished my undergrad, and then went straight into my postgrad, so I did a master's, and then I was still training. I gave up rugby. I was playing a little bit, but I was boxing a lot. And then it got me super interested in, like, okay, how does this work? And I guess most people I talked to who got in this field went searching for information about combat sports nutrition, and like there's just not a lot of info out there. So when I finished my postgrad, instead of taking a couple jobs here, I went over to Canada, and I went to go there for about 6 months, but I ended up staying there for nearly 3 years, and I was just traveling around. And while I was over there is really when everything clicked to me that I was like, hey, you know what, like, people need to know about this more. I was training at an MMA gym there, and there were guys doing weight cuts. I never cut weight myself until I was over in Canada a couple of years ago. And then we had like an underground jiu-jitsu tournament. And at the time, MMA was like illegal in Ontario. And so there was only like 3 weight classes. I think it was like 150, 175, 200, and I was like 170 at the time. And I cut down to 150, and like I was the guy, I had like a degree, 2 degrees in nutrition. I still had no idea what I was doing. And then I did this weight cut, man, it was horrible. And then I was like, man, there's got to be a better way, and just started experimenting with it. And, you know, the guys at the gym, we were kind of just playing mad scientists with each other. And I thought, oh man, there's got to be a better way. So after that, I kind of thought, you know, like we've got to make this a bit better. And that's essentially how the Fight Dietitian started. And I came back to Australia and kind of kicked everything off, and fast forward, you know, a year and a bit now, and yeah, everything's where it's at now. So that's the short version of it all.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, when I was competing, I'm a big cutter myself. I was always cutting weight. I started my first passion was kickboxing. I was very into it. I was training like more than 10 years. I was competing professional kickboxing, and I was always cutting. As a kid, I was competing with 67.
Yeah.
Then when I grew up, get more muscular, I started competing with 71. But the thing is, I was walking like 76, 78 kilos. I was comfortably cutting to 71, but then I got in the Sambo national team, combat Sambo national team. And in combat Sambo, the weight classes are very different from kickboxing. They're 68, and the next weight class is 75. But 75 was too heavy for me because I was a bit behind that time with the grappling part. I was more of a striker. The thing is, in combat Sambo, there was no they still you cannot score with striking. It's only count if you have effective striking. If you drop someone, then you get points for that if the guy stands up, or if you knock him out. But literally you cannot catch up, win by points with striking. You have to be effective, or you have to wrestle.
Yeah, yeah.
So
you see that a lot.
Brutal rules because.
You see that a lot, hey, with judo guys, hey, like when they come up, when they go through like cadets and stuff, when as they get older, the weight classes kind of spread out a bit, and that's when you have to get these, you know, start taking these weight making practices a bit more serious. As I'm sure it's the same in Sambo.
Yeah, the thing with combat Sambo is the competition is always one. They're doing a lot of Sambo, they know, but the people here don't know that the most horrific competition you can have is the World Championship in Sambo. Because you're fighting with all these badasses all over the planet, mostly from Russian Republic, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Dagestani guys. They're badasses as, you know, the selected, right? And it's all fights in one day. If you're competing in a World Championship, you can have 5-6 fights until the final. And we always there's these horrible people. Every single one of them is just horrible opponent. Especially from the from the Old Russian republics, Mongolia, Russian itself. Most of the people in the national team, they're from their services, you know, either police or the army or like special service. They're real killers, you know. And you're fighting with these people all in one day. The thing is, the weights in combat Sambo the previous day. So the weight cut is a bit similar to professional MMA fight, but you have to consider that you're gonna be fighting not the night after. You're starting 7 o'clock. You're fighting the whole day. So you warm up in the morning. You pretty much you keep warm during the day, and it's this fight. Then you have a bit of rest, another fight, but you pretty much stay warm the whole day because you get cold. Once the bracket starts and you're on, you pretty much compete all day. You have a lunch break, but the whole time you have to stay warm because you just get cold and you have 5 minutes to go on the mat, otherwise you go disqualified. And it's really not similar as having one fight because it's just so much pressure on the body, staying warm all day and just like going out and fight, hard fight, come back, cool down a bit, have a bit of massage because you're doing jiu-jitsu, your forearms got pumped, and with the same time you put headbutts, ground and pound, elbows, and groin kicks. Groin kicks, by the way, are legal in Sambo.
Yeah, I think, and that's the thing, and I guess, you know what, the work that I do kind of contributes to it, and people look at UFC and they see these guys do these big weight cuts, and like you said, we've got 24 hours, and some of the local cards in Australia, we have up to 36 hours to rehydrate. So when you have that leeway, you do have a bit more space that you can say, okay, we can bring this weight down. It's very different for so a setup like that, say, where you've got to compete 7 a.m. and then do multiple fights, or amateur boxing where you're weighing in one morning, you've got your fight, and then you've got to weigh in again, and then weigh in potentially the next day. The guys in like Thailand now, the Aussie team are over there and they're doing 10 days in a row, and they'll weigh in 4 or 5 times. And so it's a completely different setup. So you really have to take it as they come. Or like a jiu-jitsu tournament, there can be tournaments where you literally turn up, you go in, you weigh in, you go to the bullpen, and you can get called up straight away. So you can't be doing
these. Most of them are like that now. Especially here in Australia. You go past the weights and you go probably less than an hour on the mat. So you pretty much, it's very important when you're cutting weight to consider the condition you're gonna compete, because as we said, we're just talking about the jiu-jitsu tournaments. You can cut a bit, but not as much as you have like the 24 hours period to recover. Because from my experience from weight cutting, it's as important how you recover from the weight cut than as the weight cut itself, because then it comes to performance. So one thing is to achieve the scale, and then after you achieve the scale, it's okay, now I have to fight with this guy, right? I cannot do it in this like drain state and everything.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, hey, in like combat sports. You kind of hear of the weigh-in being the fight before the fight, which is kind of ridiculous. Like, you kind of think, yeah, man, you made weight, that's cool, but now you got to actually go out there and fight someone. And if you're going out drained, like you said, it's not ideal for performance. And I guess with those sports, it's good to consider. And again, when you look at the guys at the UFC, you always see people, and you think of, whenever people think of weight cutting, they think of running in a sauna suit, or they think of sitting in a sauna or in a heat room and sweating. But sweating is just one of the tactics that you can use to manipulate your weight. There's a lot of good strategies. Like, obviously a good diet for you can have a good diet, especially with jiu-jitsu. I have guys who can move up to 5, 6, 7 kilos in 2-3 weeks if they have a good diet and manipulate it enough. So you can manipulate a diet just from the get-go, have a good diet that's matched to your training, matched to your body's metabolism. It's good, healthy, fueling your training, fueling your recovery, but still getting you in enough deficit that your body fat's going to come down. And then come fight week, there's lots of strategies. You can do a low fiber, low residue diet where you're pretty much clearing out the content of your gut, and that's just simple swaps from high fiber foods, say brown rice to white rice, or brown bread to white bread, things like that. Peeling your fruits, peeling your veggies, and you can get up to a kilo and a half of weight that's just coming out of your guts just from there. And then you can combine that with, say, a water load. And Reed Reel, who's running the UFC in Shanghai, UFC PI in Shanghai, kind of brought this into the academic world of doing a water load where you can increase your water intake. And you'd know probably, and coming from a boxing background, this was something that boxers always used to do and no one really knew why. But you do these water loads, and the idea is that you increase the water, and then you increase the hormones that are telling your body to keep urinating and pushing out water. And then so when you slowly bring that down or drastically cut the water, those hormones are still high, and you're urinating. And that done properly is pretty safe. And then you can get 500 grams to a kilo there. So that's another kilo, 2 kilos that you've got just there. And then you can mess around with your sodium or your salt. You don't want to completely remove salt, especially if you're water loading. But if you reduce that salt, you can move, say, another 500 grams. That's 2.5, 3 kilos just there that you've done just from changing your diet. And you can do that in 4 or 5 days. And it's crazy. And that's nothing drastic. That's without putting on a sauna suit. That's not getting up early, doing extra runs. That's not doing anything drastic. That's just simple changes with your diet. And you've got 2-3 kilos that you can play with there. So I always say to guys, like, well, let's have a look. Like, where you get, like you said, it's about performance. What's your best performance weight? And say if you've got to weigh in at 67.5, maybe you can get away with walking around 70, 71 kilos, because we know we can just 4 or 5 days out, we can just do these simple little strategies. You're still going to be able to train really hard leading up to that. And then when you weigh in, take your electrolyte drink, your carbohydrate drink with you, sip as normal, you're good to go. And you see the difference when guys do that, and then they rock up and they'll be in good spirits at a competition, jumping around, and then you look over the other guys that you know have been cutting weight or know have been in the sauna, and I've been there, as I'm sure you have, Seb, like, and you're just like, oh man, like people are talking to you, like, oh, what's your game plan? You're just like, oh man, get away from me, like, I just want to weigh in. And then when you get to the fight, you kind of like, I just want this to be over, like, I just want this to be over so I can go. So there's a good way to do it, and there's a not so good way to do it.
Well, my first time when I cut for combat sambo, so I was already like, I was 76-7 kilos straight, right? And so I got invited in the national team, and I got invited in the national team very funny way. My wife actually put me in the national team because I was competing in combat sambo and Sanda and mostly K1 kickboxing, most of my favorite stuff. Because back in the day, at least back home, we had like as a kickboxer, you have like a K1 national championship, full contact, which is with the pants and like no kicks in the legs. And there was full contact kickboxing, which is kickboxing with wall kicks but without the knees. So we have three national championships. So, but my favorite side was K1. So the funny thing is, like, I just won the K1 national championship. I'm happy in the car, so I'm champion, job done. And I'm driving, and I was training sambo meanwhile, and my wife got the call, and she was speaking Simon. I was happy driving, like, who is? She's like, oh, it's your sambo coach. Oh, what he wants. I thought he's calling me to greet me about winning the kickboxing championship. And she said, yeah, he wants you in the national team, so I signed you up. I said, like, at least you have to ask, right? Like, I'm going to fight. I said, you'll be right. So that's what I get. But the thing is, I was already overgrown. I was competing 67 as a kid, but I overgrown the weight. So, and I didn't have much time. I think it was pretty much short notice, this one. I have to cut to 68. And it was brutal. My first world championship was brutal because I pretty much did the 8 kills in a week. And it was way below I was cutting before because I was comfortably cutting like 5-6 kills. That's easy. From 76 to 71 was absolute comfortable cut. I can do it even for a day. But to drop these last ones was terrible, and we will have to travel, and I pretty much went so dehydrated there. I was barely holding my feet, and we're in Russia, and it's super cold, and I'm going on the scale and 1 kilo over. And World Championship is you have 1 hour. If you don't make the weight, you're out of the country. You cannot switch category because you're a national team. You're booked for this way. So I had to cut the last kilo just for an hour, and I'm like dry as you can believe. I'm like I'm powder, man. And I remember like I have pretty much all the quotes of the team over me, from the ones that fit me to the heavyweight guys. And I'm doing a stationary bike. It was in a big gym, and I'm pretty much sleeping on the bike because I cannot stay awake. My mind is off. I'm pushing the bike. My wife staying next to me because my wife was a team's doctor of the national team. We're not married yet, and she's crying because my gums are bleeding, my mouth is bleeding. So I don't know the reason behind, but when I was cutting weight drastically, my teeth start bleeding, and I'm spitting blood, and my coach is staying next to me, and she's talking to her. I remember that because that's the only sound I hear. Don't worry, don't drop him out. We're all crazy. I'm like dying, like my coach speaking this shit to my girlfriend. I was like, man, I'm still alive. I made it, but it was very hard. So after this, I started to do waterboarding, and it worked perfectly, man. I just it was way more relaxed way to cut weight. I was cutting a bit because 68 was a bit low for me for my performance, but 75 was too high. The guys there are huge, so it's from 75 they cut from 85, and they're like monsters. These guys, like.
Yeah, so that's it's a good point, isn't it? Because like I think there's two things to like appreciate about it, and you brought up a good point there. Is that everyone does cut weight. Now, I haven't spoken, especially on the podcast, like you mentioned earlier, where I'm talking to all these experts around the world who I would consider there's probably a group of maybe 15 of us that are like academic background that are really pushing this evidence-based practice and scientific practice. Not one of us are against cutting weight. Like we all do it as well. We either are currently competing or used to be competitors. Everyone knows like it's not fun, man. Like if you go in that, and you see it all the time in like jiu-jitsu, if you go in the open weight, it's not fun when you go up against the really big guy, because especially in those grappling sports, that size advantage is going to play a big part. None of us are against cutting weight. It's against the extreme weight cuts, like maybe sitting on a bike. The fact that you can get to a scale and be that dry, that you're already 1 kilo over. It's not, obviously back then it was a short notice call up, but that's just a product of poor planning and not what I call is executing a cut safely and correctly. And that was a big reason why I wanted to start the Fight Dietitian and then get this podcast out there, is because from where I'm sitting, knowing what I know, that shouldn't ever really happen. There should never be a time where someone gets to a competition and they're overweight or they're walking in and they feel terrible. If you give yourself enough time, you go through the correct assessments, and you put yourself around a team that says, hey, this is the weight that is good for your body, and we can assess that. Like you can go in, and I don't think people realize is that if you go to the right people, they can get a scan, a body scan. You can figure out exactly how much muscle you have, how much fat you have. They can see how much body water you have, and you can say, okay, from this and from the amount of training that you do, you're expending this much energy, and we know if we put in this much calories, this is how much your weight is going to fluctuate. In this time period, you should lose this much weight. And then by looking at that data, we can say, okay, if we need to manipulate some water, we know you have this much water in your body, and we can bring down, and this is a safe amount that we can do. So if you want to get to this weight, we need to give ourselves this much time to do it. And so we can plan it out completely. Even if you want to do a bigger cut, it is possible to do it. You've just got to plan it and do it safely, and then put yourself around the people that are going to do this. But again, I appreciate, especially in like amateur boxing, you can get like you did. You can get these events that just pop up last minute, and you go, oh crap, like I've got to make weight for this comp. And then that's why, and I guess the guys at UFC PI, Clint Wadenberg, kind of termed this phrase of the 52-week fight camp, where you're always, you don't have to be strictly dieting, but always kind of eating a performance nutrition plan. You're always eating to that. So if these last minute call-ups come, yeah, you're ready to go. Like, okay, I'll just call the team. What do I need to do to get to this weight? Is it doable? Yeah, it's doable. It may hurt a little bit. It's not going to be too drastic. Let's get there, because there's so much complication that I feel people don't realize. Like, this is the other thing, and I always say to guys, I preach it. It's like, yeah, we made weight, but at what cost? And I do this. I had this with the guys in the UFC where, and this kind of irks me a lot, where you see guys, they rock up to the scale, they jump on, they go, yeah, we made weight. They're taking photos, and you've seen it when they bring up the towels and they can barely stand, and everyone goes, yeah, they made weight. Then no one ever talks about it after. It goes, yeah, he made weight, but what's that doing to his kidneys? What's that doing to his liver? What's he done to his long-term health? And then the next fight, yeah, he might go back out and he might rehydrate and recover, and then he'll go out and he'll have a good fight, and he might knock the guy out, and then no one talks about the weight cut. And then it comes time to do that weight cut again. He does that rough weight cut, goes back on the scales, barely holding anything. It's like, if he keeps doing that time and time again, what's that doing to his long-term health? You know what I mean? There's a different way that you need to look at weight cutting. I guess that's kind of my whole philosophy about it.
Well, you pointed very good, and I was speaking about these drastic weight cuts I was doing when I started doing Sambo as well, and I had a talk with he's not my coach. I was working from time to time. He's a very famous boxing coach back home, and he's a boxing coach in the youngsters national team in the moment. Very knowledgeable guy. He was also involved in kickboxing as well. So when he saw me doing these cuts, he said, "How much you're cutting?" And I told him like 8 kilos. He said, "Man, you're gonna bust your internal organs. You don't do that. If you want to compete on these events, additional to your kickboxing, you just have to stay whiter." And then I said, "Yeah, but how have you figure that? It's so simple, because I'm already a champion, right? Like staying like 2 kilos under, like my walking weight just by just managing my weight. It's not gonna drastically change my kickboxing performance. I'm still gonna be good enough. But then when it comes my sambo events, I can easily cut to 68 the category I was competing without having to do so drastic cuts. And it's at the end of the day, I'm not a bodybuilder. Everyone wants to be big, right? Even myself, 75 is not so big, but gives you a good feeling in the gym, right? But the thing is, being 75, being 76 is not a big deal walking, but it helps you a lot with when you have to cut weight. And the other thing that you said, and I'm absolutely lean to that as well, is I hear very often, even your guests, some of them mention that cutting weight is cheating the scales. It's not. As the thing is, it will be always part of the sport, and it always be. Even in one championship that they may make this hydration test, all they do for me is they make more work for the scientists how to go around or in coaches. But it's weight cut is always going to be part of the sport because by my personal experience, your walking weight is not your optimal weight for performance. Even later when I was doing before I actually retire from actively competing to stop myself because it's very hard to stop competing. I started doing just grappling, just to calm down, and to get out of it because it was very hard for me to stop. I was fighting a lot and I love it, and then even when I didn't really matter for me what weight I'm going to compete in grappling. It was just I was not giving it so much importance. I'm not going to get hurt, but I was still cutting a bit just for the feeling of it. I need this feeling of being a bit hungry to perform, and I find out it might be mental, but if even being a bit wider than your walking weight, you perform better. Your walking weight is not your performance weight. And I could come back to that the cheating the scale is not cheating the scale, but what is dangerous the ignorance of people who don't know how to do it properly. If you know how to do it properly, it's not cheating. It's if you say cutting weight is cheating, then involving a nutrition is cheating. No, involving a conditioning specialist is cheating. It's not cheating. It's part of the sport, but it's science. And it's really nice now to see people who are coming from the sport. They get the proper education. They're coming back to the sport, and they start to investigate the mechanism and how to do this safely in the proper way, and also to maintain your long-term health. Because as an amateur, how long do you think you're going to compete? You might compete, stay in the sport 10 years, you might not, even if you're professional. So, and even if you're a professional, how much you earn as professional? Yes, you do some money here and there, but if you're not super good, if you, for example, don't win UFC or something like that, you might be not living from that all your life. So you have to be healthy. So that's very important for me. It's false perspective. I hear that very often now, especially with ONE FC, and that's not the right way. I'm not big fan of what ONE FC is doing.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. I don't think anyone who's kind of in the academic space that I've spoken to, myself included, it's kind of just a fast reaction band-aid effect. It's not well thought out, in my opinion. It's not. It's good. It's good that they've brought it up, and it's good that they're taking an initiative. But a hydration test, define hydration, and this is the thing, is that I find it hard, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert in hydration, but I have pretty good knowledge of systems physiology and biochemistry, and it's a difficult question to ask when someone says, okay, well, how do you know if I'm well hydrated? And you kind of start running through everything in your head and you go, well, that's a hard question to ask. You can be hydrated in so many different parts of your body. And the biggest thing when we're talking about the field we're in, rapid weight loss in combat sports, these hydration tests, they're not designed for someone who's just been sitting in a sauna for 2, 3, 4 hours and then testing that. That's not the point of it. The thing is, you get dehydrated in so many different compartments of your body, and you can go to this hydration test, and like I have quite a few athletes in one, and you can do it. Like you said, it's just I know the science, and you know how to bend the rules, and I still cut weight with my guys there, and we still come down and we pass the hydration test. You can do that because the urine that you're putting in that cup doesn't represent what's going on the rest of your body. You can be fairly dehydrated in other parts of your body, and then the part of your body that produces or filtrates that urine, you can manipulate that and pass that urine test. It's just like you said. That's just science, and it's not very well thought out on one. Like, it's great. Don't get me wrong. It's a great initiative. I just don't think it's as well thought out as it could be. And I think there's another good point that you brought up about, being a bit lighter than your walk around weight. And everyone kind of has this assumption, and I get it. Like I said earlier, you notice if you jump in like an open weight and you have someone bigger, like this size advantage and this strength advantage is something that's been really interesting for me. And I run a few pilot studies, and we were just lucky enough to get attached to another guy from the Gold Coast, Dan Brown, his PhD. So now we've got a bit of funding to investigate it a bit further, is this size advantage. And that's what is it? When you're cutting weight, the idea that everyone has is that you'll come into the ring, cage, whatever, jump on the mats bigger. But does that translate to a better performance? And when you look through the literature and you look through the data, it's not very clear whether it does or does not. Yet everyone who does weight cutting seems to think that it does. And it's fine. And I always say to guys, like, it might work for you, but feeling isn't fact. And just because it works for you and you can get out there, you've got to consider your style of fighting. And when it comes to fighting, there's so much more than just how strong you are. Like anyone that does fighting, if you get someone who's really, really technical and been training for a long time, and you put them up against a big guy just on the street, I don't care that guy's big. I know who I'm putting my money on, So there's so much more to it than just gaining that little bit size advantage. So when it comes to weight cutting, and a lot of people kind of saying that, like, and you see with coaches, and it's not about stepping on any coach's toes or anything, but we just don't know a lot of things. Like a lot of things that we just consider as truths when it comes to making weight for combat sports, we just don't know the answer. But people say, what's the best way? Like, what's the best weight to come down and then come back up to? It's like, well, we don't know. We don't know. People haven't done the study. Like you said, it's just now that people are taking it to a bit more of a sciencey. What's the best way to rehydrate? Well, we don't know just yet. Like, we have pretty good ideas that this might be it, but we don't know. So it's an interesting field, but there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns with it, and it's pretty hard to give a conclusive statement and say, this is the best way to cut weight, this is the best thing for you to do, because no one really knows.
Well, I speak only by experience. I'm not a scientist in the field, but I have a bit of experience. The thing is, it's very hard, at least if I try to think from scientific point of view, to estimate the performance in combat sports, because they're skill-based sports. But at the same time, strength in a competition is skill as well. You cannot deny a stronger guy with the same skill, it has a bigger chance to win. It's just something else that adds to the sport. I think it would be way easier if the performance was similar to athletics, when you have like a straight discipline running 400 meters. It's very easy to make scientific conclusions there because the test is very easy. But in combat sport, the competition environment is very complex. It includes the mental state of the athlete, the skill, and then also his physical performance, and it has so much variables involved. But the thing as well is, and again, I'm not speaking this from scientific point of view, just from a sheer experience, that there is a limit of how big you are and your performance. I mean, like, to a certain level, yes, if you cut a bit, your size gives you advantage and your strength is right. But there is a certain limit, and I've experienced this myself, when you cut under your performance weight, because there is a very, very fine limit for everyone, his performance weight. But when you go too much under your performance weight, you even get slower. You're not fast as that, and you're not strong. you're big, but you're not strong. And there's difference of being big and strong. As you said on the street, yes, they're big guys, but if you cannot use this mass and this mass, they're not really useful. The same in combat sport. If you overcut or you push yourself under your performance weight, you're not performing as you expect normal. You're slower, you're not as strong, you're drained. So it's a very fine balance, and it's really awesome that people like you get involved in this environment, because I'm all for more science, but not for more regulation, because it's regulation doesn't really solve the thing. That it's the history in the sport show that people are very inventive, to go around the regulations, and that's if you watch. If you see the history of the Olympics, it's all about that. They have new regulations, people go around, new regulations, people go around. It goes over and over, and it will go forever. So I was looking for this conversation because I had a we had with IMMAFA Australia, we have this scouting session in Sydney, and because strangely enough, here the amateur competitions are not really popular, not in the format that they hold in Europe. In Europe, as an amateur, you're used to compete in tournaments. But here in Australia now happens to be new. We're doing a Queensland Open on 12th and 13th of October, and people will have now to face the competition format of fighting in MMA. Of course, the rules are a bit softer. They have progression rules. We're doing these skills division similar to jiu-jitsu. But the thing is, I was asked because from the guys there, many of them had like competition experience in jiu-jitsu and a bit of amateur MMA, how it's done in Australia. But amateur MMA in Australia here is the people who listen back home is the same form as professional MMA. You just don't get paid, right?
Mm.
And you have like this 24 hours cut, which is not the case in amateur competition back in Europe or in combat sambo in Eastern Europe. And I was asked, okay, what we do with the weight? And the other coaches was not really willing to answer, and I stepped in and I said, for absolutely from my experience, I would suggest that you compete or you compete 4% under your weight where you're in shape. But okay, that's backed up only by experience as a coach and as a competitor in such tournament formats, but was not backed up by science. So how much would you support that claim, and how close I was to the truth? That's my question. Was bothering me all the time before we get to this stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess Taekwondo is like a good example of that, because Taekwondo now have enforced that, you come in, you weigh in, and they've got the 5% rule. Like, you can't be heavier than 5% of what you weigh in. So if you cut down weight, you can't be heavier the next day.
That's very similar to Olympic judo. Judo do it like that.
Yeah, judo do it as well. And I think it's a very interesting case. And like we've had, like you said, with amateur MMA, people are cutting weight. I think there's a general rule of thumb that you'd never want people cutting more than 10%, and if they're cutting like just 5% is pretty safe. 5% is a safe amount that people can come down without having to resort to dehydration within most weight classes. So when you get to the heavier boys, 5% is quite a lot of their body weight, so it might change. But for most people who compete, 4-5% is very, very doable with those strategies that I said earlier, just manipulating your fiber, your water, which is doable. Again, when you talk about optimum performance weight, like you alluded to earlier, there is weights. Like you said, there is a weight that you can perform at, and it's generally a little bit lower. Like it's not like other sports where you say, okay, 14% body fat is the ideal weight for MMA, because what's that mean? MMA is made of wrestling, it's made of jiu-jitsu, it's made of kickboxing, boxing, Muay Thai. So it's like, okay, maybe this body fat is good for wrestling, but it might not be good for Muay Thai. So
it absolutely depends from style.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. Like, and I find with guys, how much weight you come down depends on their style. If they're a very grappling heavy style, then bring them down a bit more, and then put them back up, because that extra weight is going to be an advantage for them. But striking, like, don't get me wrong, like I've been punched by some big boys and it hurts. But if you're quicker and you've got a better head movement, like that, and they can't hit you, it doesn't really matter if they're bigger than you. It doesn't matter if you can't hit them. So yeah, the styles really dictate it. 4%, it's hard to say. I think it's a good idea. I think it more comes into a conversation of what are the rules. I know King in the Ring in New Zealand, really famous tournament, they do check-ins, which I really like. Every 2 weeks they have to submit weights, so you have to. But man, it's a complex issue because if you move it to same day weigh-ins, which I know they were talking about here, you move amateur to same day weigh-ins and then they have to weigh in again before they come in, or if you do night before weigh-ins and then they weigh in again the same day, it should means 2 weight cuts. Like if you're being realistic, people just cut weight twice, and so it's a very if I had a good answer for it, I think we'd be doing it instead of talking about it. But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, it's interesting because IMMF, especially the format that is going to be here in Queensland, so it's 2 days. So you have like preliminary fights one day, and you have the final fights Sunday, which means you have to pass the weights 2 times. And there's something else. The next year, May, is going to be a big competition here in Gold Coast, QLD Open, which is going to be a world-class competition. And then you might have to compete for a week. So that's something else. And every day of the week, you have to pass. You go in the morning, pass your scale, and then you have to fight. So in such a tournament environment, it's very different from a single fight, because it's one thing, to replenish and to recover for a fight. It's one thing if you have to perform this day, but then the next day you have to be on scale in the morning again, and then to fight again, and that lasts for a week. So it's a very different environment from cutting from a single fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you see that a lot with the amateur boxers when they have to do 3-day tournaments. And all of my guys, you're not cutting weight. It's just not pliable. Like, sure, you can do that. You can cut weight for that first day, come in, weigh in, and then fight, and then you'll eat, and you'll put on all that weight, but then you have to go to the sauna that night, or that morning you have to go for a sauna. Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 days you might get away from it, but if you're doing that for a week, that's going to directly affect your performance 2-3 days in. So a lot of those guys, 5%, I won't let my boxers get any heavier than 5% out. Again, that's just because we can stay on those low fiber. We can enact a water load. You can keep them on those low fiber foods for the duration of the competition. Low fiber food doesn't mean no carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are absolutely vital for fighting. Like, you need them to do fighting. And so you need to keep those fibers in, the low fibers in, but have the high carbohydrates, and you can do that by just removing the fiber. It means that the weight stays down. Yeah, 5% if we're doing multiple day weigh-ins is what I recommend for my guys.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned the carbs, and there's something else with the carbs. It's your brain is feeding on carbs, and if you're going to fight and if you're gonna get hit, if your brain is malnutrition, you're risking the damage of the head. So that's something else that comes with the carbs. It's not only cutting the weight, as we spoke before. You have to perform, and in a fight competition, you're gonna get hit in the head if it's striking well, and then it's your brain, and the condition of your brain is your worst defense of taking damage. So it's also important. You cannot just go on. My wife is competing. She was fighting before. She's competing in fitness now. They can go really really well with dehydration, because no one hits you in the head when you compete. It's just like stage ready everything. But in a combat sport environment, when you have to perform against someone who tries to hurt you, because that's the game, it's very different. It's not just as simple, okay, I'm just gonna cut the weight, I'm gonna be shredded and everything, and then you have to fight. So
yeah, and there's a couple good things, and good points there, is that when you think about it, your brain is suspended in fluid in this thing that is your head, right? So if you're cutting weight, you're bringing down that fluid. You think of it, if you have a cup of water and you drop a marble, or a ball in that cup of water and shake it round, it's okay. But if you take the water out of that cup and shake it around, what happens? It just bangs all across in there. So weight cutting in itself increases the risk of that brain movement around your head. We know now that there's evidence of CTE, so we see that now, like Muhammad Ali and all these boxers that are coming through later in life from these repeated trauma to the head are getting real damage. And the thing with CTE is that it doesn't have to be a direct shot to your head. You're getting them from body shots, you get taken down, anywhere where you've got movement in the head where it's whipping back and forth, you're getting these little micro traumas to your brain. And then again, like you said, with carbohydrates, it's the main fuel source. So you think about your reaction time, you think about how sharp you are, you think about how explosive you are in your movements. Fighting is about explosive movements, and the system we use is called your glycolytic system. That's when you're shooting in for a takedown, pa, 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 with that combination. That's your glycolytic system, 0 to 3 to 0 to 10 seconds. That's all fueled by carbohydrates. You might be able to get through one round of it. You might be able to shoot in once and get away with it, but you got to reshoot again, second, third time, you're not doing it. And I think the third one, which is really big and comes into weight cutting, is we talk about this thing called like mental fatigue. And it kind of works in two ways. Guys, when they're cutting weight, you see it. And I personally like it. I like the process of cutting weight. I feel like it gets me ready for a competition. I like it, but you know, if you've ever sat in the sauna for that bit too long and you pushed, and Oliver said this to me this week, it's like having a stick. It's like having a stick and poking you. Having a stick and someone poking you doesn't make you punch any less harder. It doesn't make your wrestling any worse. But having a stick poking you is going to annoy you. It's going to bring down your performance. That's essentially what like weight cutting does on your mental aspect, and we call it mental fatigue. So guys who've cut a lot of weight, they feel drained. They're not any worse as a grappler. They're not any worse as a fighter, but they've just put themselves through this big mental fatigue. So when it comes out time to go on the mats and perform, they might rehydrate. They might feel good. They might be hitting the pads and feeling sharp, but they've got all this mental fatigue that they've gone through, so they're not going to be as sharp. Compound that on top of everything we just mentioned, it's not great for performance. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, that's for sure.
Well, you point very well about mental fatigue, and as you said, these guys that are cheering after the scale, what happened is it's everyone has experienced that, especially in the grappling tournament, when you win your first and cheer, then you suck on the next match. Because you're spending your mental energy for that, you spend your concentration, you kind of, it's, mental game is very interesting subject as well, but when you spend so much mental energy to cheer the achievement that is not actually the achievement that you are aiming for, then you're tired for the next effort. You say, oh, I did that, but then when the real effort comes, it's the actual fight, if it's a MMA fight or it's a final fight, and you spend all this mental energy, to cheer and to be happy with the result that you achieve with your first fight, or you're achieving the weight cut. You're not so sharp. You're not so constrained to give the effort that you need for actually the real challenge, which is the final fight. Or it's really interesting, as you say, that like if you make so much effort that's actually your main battle in the competition, what's left for the real performance? Mental aspect is really something that I think probably like doesn't make it easier for your work and research. Just so complex issue is the combat sports. Speaking about that, what would you say about there's a lot of extreme diets that have become fashionable, and they're all based on bro science, and as coach they really piss me off sometimes. Speaking about vegetarians and vegans, but when they come to performance and weight cut, because especially vegan and vegetarian diet, they're pretty much high carb diets by nature. And when they come to the situation that they have to perform in combat sports, and there are a lot of people who are trying to do that now and to cut weight, how that works from your perspective? Do you have any experience with vegetarian athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have like Big Paul Craig I've worked with before. He's completely vegan and he's in the UFC, and he if you see him, like, he's a beast. Like I've got yeah, like a K1 Australian champion kickboxer who's completely vegan. Like I have girls who are, very high level grapplers that are vegan. It's I've got a professional boxer we're working together right now. She's vegan, and it's not, I guess the way I look at it, it's just all physiology, isn't it? There's just certain things that you need to tick off. And when it comes to combat sports, if you think about it, like carbohydrates, as you said, are really important, like we were talking about, for your performance. Protein is really important for like your muscle maintenance and then your recovery. So, and then traditionally, vegan foods aren't that high in protein, but you can definitely get the protein. Like you just got to know how to mix and match your amino acids. And there's great, and then things like supplements. Like a supplement is exactly that. It's to supplement your diet. For someone like a vegan, a supplement is good. You can supplement protein if you're lacking in that area. I've never personally, people who kind of say that, yeah, vegan, you know, bring down performance. I don't think so. Like I think in terms of body composition, if you think of a vegan diet, they're not eating crap, they're not eating processed foods, they're eating whole plant-based foods. So in terms of when you look at it, most vegans, they're in pretty good nick. And in terms of performance, yeah, they've got really high carb diets, but like when we're cutting weight, you can kind of get into the talk about, like total carbohydrates, and compare that against, your fibrous carbohydrates, which don't actually contribute to anything. And then we're just, like I said, when you switch to a low carb diet, they're used to having so much fiber in their diet. When you bring that down and make this low carb fiber swap, they almost lose double what you and I would not eating it. So yeah, I've never had problems with vegans. I've never had problems with vegans getting enough protein. I've never had problems with vegans running down at training. They perform just as well. I'd love to do a study to see how they compare. I know Dr. Doug Kalman over in the US, he works out in Florida there, did a research paper comparing animal-based protein. So I think it was just a WPI, which is synonymous with cow's milk. And then he compared it to a rice protein, and he did it within high-level mixed martial arts out of guys fighting out of Hard Knocks over there, very high-level gym over there. And so one group was taking just the plant-based protein, the other one was taking the cow's milk protein, so the animal protein, and he found that there was no difference in body composition, no difference in performance. So vegans kind of get a bad rap. I think the worst rap that vegans get is because they just constantly remind you that they're vegan, and it's everything else outside, it's everything else that they talk about. Yeah, fair enough. Like, okay, I get it, but in terms of performance and their nutrition, yeah, I've never had any problems with vegetarians or vegans making weight, performing, or anything like that.
But that's quite interesting. Other interesting that would be in this plant-based diet, it's how they affect hormonal balance, because you probably know better than me how the nutrition affects the hormones, and that's very interesting as well.
I think just quickly, Seb, like hormone balances, I think this is a massive thing, and I think if anyone that's listening and you're going to take anything away from this chat, take this next thing that I'm about to say. There's something that happens to us as humans when we eat too little calories, and this is an area that if this syndrome is called what we call REDS. It's called relative energy deficiency in sport. And this is, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of my peers and colleagues, is one of the worst problems when it comes to combat sport athletes, because what it is essentially your body. So how you figure out, we call it energy balance. So energy balance is based on the food that you eat gives you so much energy, and then the food that you burn through exercise. So if you bring in, let's say 2,000 calories, and then you burn 1,000 calories, you're at a balance of 1,000. And that's ignoring like every other thing, like your energy that you're using when you're fidgeting. Let's just say, for simplistic purposes, you've eaten 2,000 calories, you burn off 1,000, so you're going to be at a balance of, say, 1,000. But the thing is, with combat sport athletes, it's not uncommon for guys to be training 2-3 times a day. So that energy output goes right up. And then, as you'll know, what's the most common thing that any fighter will ever tell you when it comes to their diet? Less, always less. So this energy comes up, and then the calories come down. So what happens to this balance? is we go into what's called like a negative energy balance. And then when we're in that negative energy balance, we get symptoms of this REDS, this relative energy deficiency syndrome. And so what happens there, what the biggest kicker of that is a hormone imbalance. When your body doesn't have the energy to do its most basic functions, to produce its hormones, you see things like low iron in women, testosterone in men goes down, your ability to mobilize fat and use that during rest goes away. You see mood disorders with athletes. That's why a lot of what we contribute when people are cutting weight is probably because of this, is because they're not producing enough, say, serotonin or things like that, because of the back end of this REDS. So when you're in this negative energy balance, it's not good for your body. And the thing is, you do that over a fight camp, which is 8 weeks. You're just constantly in this negative. And then what happens after everyone, when you do a competition, first thing you do, your body goes, you run to a buffet or you run to a store, and you just eat. And there's probably good evidence to support that your body just wants you to bring that balance back up. It wants you to bring that balance back up. But if you get guys that are amateurs and they're competing every month, every 2 months, and they're trying to make weight, they can't do that. They bring it up and then they're just back down. And then they're back down again. And then they're back down again. And for a little while, that's okay. That's okay. But you think about that over the long term. No one's really looked at that over the long term and goes, what's the effect of being in this negative energy balance for an extended period of time? Yeah, like I said earlier, you might be making weight. You might be performing. We can throw carbs at you, and come fight night, you'll use them really fast, but you're probably still going to be in this negative energy balance. What's that do if you do that for 5 years straight? What's that do for your testosterone? What's that do for your hormones? What's that do for your ability to burn fat? And a lot of older combat athletes kind of complain and say, look, man, like I just can't, like I just stacked on weight when I stopped competing. Like I still train. Maybe it has something to do with that. Their hormones are messed up. They can't mobilize the fat as well. Maybe their testosterone's so low that they can't burn through the fat. Again, we don't really know. We know that that's an issue that we need to be aware of, and that's why I really encourage people to work with someone. Like, I'm not saying go work with a dietitian, but work with someone that has adequate knowledge of this, that if you're bringing down this energy balance to make weight, make sure you have a period where you can bring it back up, or if you're doing it within a safe limit for your body. So if anyone's listening, take that away. Listen to that again and kind of wrap your head around that, because in my opinion, that's one of the biggest issues and most important things us as nutrition practitioners need to consider when we work with combat athletes.
Well, I like to say to my students because I work here with a small team. I started 2 years ago. Back home, I have like 3 gyms in Europe, and I like to say this all the time. Good athlete is healthy athlete, because you don't become world champion for 1 year or 2 years. You become world champion for 10 years. So which means you have to maintain yourself healthy, and especially in combat sports. You have to be healthy to train and to put all these skills on, because it doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It takes years. It takes development. So you have to maintain yourself healthy, because when you get hurt and when you get sick, you're missing training, and that's how you cut from your eventual achievement. Because at the end, as a combat sport athlete, you have race against the time. It's a young man's sport. You cannot do it too much. I wish you could, but now being 40, I'm 39, of course not 40 yet, but you feel the difference in the body. So it's very different, and my coach told me that back in the days, and I was like, yeah, whatever, until I get to 30. But when you get 30, 33, and then you start feeling how your body starts changing, you cannot be that. Okay, so you pretty much, you can, now there's a lot of knowledge about nutrition and stuff. You can prolong this to 35. There are even athletes who compete at 40 very successfully, but it's still a race against time. And you have this time that you have to fit as much training, as much knowledge you can generate to be healthy in order not to get much of the sport. So it's very important to be healthy and to maintain, like, and to get healthy out of the sport. That's the main thing. That's our sport is very dangerous sport. That's the fun of it. It's if you ask the doctors if combat sports should exist, they probably would say no. They have good reason for that, but they are fun. They're fun just because of that, because you're facing this danger. You took so much of it because of that. I think that's a good moment to say how people can get in touch with you and with all your work and the stuff you do.
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Instagram. If you want to find me on Instagram, so that's the_fight dietitian. I'm on Facebook as well. Just search the Fight Dietitian, or you head to my website, which is www.thefightdietitian.com. Yeah, like we said, we've got the podcast. I've got a whole bunch of who I consider the top experts in the world in this kind of field. All we do is talk about weight cutting, nutrition for fighting. So that's on the Apple Store and Spotify, and you can find it on my website as well. Or if you want to email me, shoot me an email directly, send it to info@thefightdietitian.com. And
Thank you for listening to the Fight Zone podcast. Subscribe in your podcast app to receive the next episode, where I talk with my great friend and student Stefan Petrov. Stefan is judo and sambo multiple national champion, combat sambo national champion, and European medalist in combat sambo. He is MMA national champion of Bulgaria, and he is currently 10-point purple belt and professional grappler fighting out of 10-point London in UK, where he is also a wrestling coach.